Hi! It's been quite a while since I sat down and decided to make video form content, and no reason aside from it takes a lot of work to get lighting set up, to make sure my makeup's done, to have something to talk about planned out, and then to actually sit down and film it. Not to mention, I promise you, every YouTuber that you watch is just really hot. Like it's hot in the room, the lights make it hot, the computer, the microphone, it's just heat everywhere. So, thank your favorite YouTuber for the content that they create, because oh my gosh. In today's video, I just wanted to talk about the books that I read in the first quarter of the year. There were only 12. If you're having a good time reading, doesn't matter how many books you finish in a year. It could be 1, could be 2, could be 102. Doesn't matter. I am not a very critical reader. I do notice things like inconsistencies in the story or a lot of repetition. Mostly, I'm just looking to have a good time. And the next thing is just that I don't rate things on a 1 to 5 star or 1 to 3 star or any other rating method. For me, either I like a book enough to finish it, I love a book enough to recommend it, or I just don't finish it at all, because I'm a very big fan of just DNFing a book if you're not having a good time. Why would I spend time sitting through a 1-star book or a book that I just don't like, I'm not having a good time with? It's different if there's something I read and it's like, this is a train wreck, I can't look away, but I haven't had any of those come across my desk in a really long time. So I'm also prefacing this with, please excuse my pronunciation of names, places, everything else. It's going to be bad. So sometimes I look it up, sometimes I don't. Okay, so let's dive in. The first book that I read this year was Children of Blood and Bone, and I actually followed it up with Children of Virtue and Vengeance. I really wanted to start the year off with a fantasy because it's just a genre that I love and I always come back to. Fantasy and psychological thrillers are really they're my jam. They're like the meat and potatoes of my reading experience. I need them in my life. So in the story of Children of Blood and Bone, there is a world in which people are born with the capability to do magic, and they are called diviners. And these people's magic have been stripped away from them by the king's regime. They're known as the Cosidon or Poseidon. These people believe that magic is inherently bad, and people who have the ability to do so will stop at nothing on their quest to reach ultimate power, and it'll be to everyone else's detriment. So the story follows our main character, Zeli. She's a diviner and just a complete and total badass. And then her brother Zane, who I absolutely adore. And it also follows Princess Amari and her brother Prince Inan. Those two fall under the king's regime. And the whole concept of the story is just Zeli trying to bring magic back to her people. I love this story. The conflict is understandable, and at times I find myself not knowing whose side I should be on. I think the author, Tomi, did a really, really good job of making both sides of the argument very valid and fleshing them out enough that you kind of don't know which side is the right one or the wrong one. It's kind of in that morally, ethically gray area where you're just like, I see where you're both coming from, but one is just kind of ethically wrong and one is just like, okay, but you're kind of logically right. Does that make sense? It's a very layered argument, and she did a great job at writing both sides enough that I find myself conflicted often within the same page. The movie that played in my head while I was reading this book was just so, it was beautiful, it was so colorful, and God, I felt so good. I think she did a great job at world building. The actual movie will be out, I think, next year, or maybe the year after sometime. I'm very excited. I would love to know who everybody thinks will be cast as our main 4 characters. And Rowan? I don't know how to pronounce his name. He's kind of a side character that shows up more in the second book, I believe, than the first book, but I want to know what you think he looks like, because in my head. So the next book I read was actually a series. It wasn't just a standalone. The From Blood and Ash series by Jennifer Armentrout. I read all the way through book 3 of this series. I did not read the spin-off series, A Shadow in the Ember, or book 4, which is The War of Two Queens, which was highly anticipated by everyone that has read the series. My sister-in-law who recommended it to me, and even myself. But then I just kind of on an act of rebellion just haven't started it yet. Part of me feels like it's more of like a fall series than something I read in the spring or summertime, which sounds foolish, I know, but I'm just gonna keep dodging spoilers like landmines and not read it, I think. We'll see. I might pick it up on a whim. We'll see. The From Blood and Ash series follows our main character, Poppy, who's kind of the chosen one. And then this kingdom full of absolutely terrifying leadership that appeared to have no souls. I feel like any other deeper description of the book might spoil it, so I don't want to get too far into it, but I will say that it is a spicier book. If you're not into reading sexual scenes, you probably don't want to read this book, because there are some. It gets intense, but it's like a really good fantasy world, and I really do like how she wrote the characters. I know that's kind of like a point of contention. A lot of people don't love Poppy as the main character. They find her incredibly annoying. That's very fair, but I like her. I think she's tough. She does start off pretty naive, which is understandable when you hear about kind of her upbringing, but I think a lot of people quit at book 3. People hated book 3. I liked it. I don't know. I like the series. I want to see where it goes. I want to see what happens in the end, so I'm still reading it. Next book that I read was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This book was so worth the hype to me. Evelyn Hugo is about a journalist named Monique Grant who is kind of struggling, and she's just looking for that story. And she's contacted by a retired actress who reaches out to her with this opportunity to interview her and essentially get her whole life story. Monique has no idea why she was chosen for this role, but she accepts because who wouldn't? Now, Evelyn Hugo is famous for being like that girl in old Hollywood, and she has kind of a scandalous past of like highly public marriages and all these secrets, and she just kind of lays them out on the table for Monique. The story is absolutely wonderful. It feels like reading a tell-all of like old Hollywood actresses, so think of diaries of Marilyn Monroe or Elizabeth Taylor or Cary Grant or Jane Mansfield. It's good. It's good. She does a really good job of setting the scene. I really do recommend it as like a weekend binge read. I think I finished it in 2 days. Started later in the evening and I finished it the next day, and it was chef's kiss perfection. Definitely recommend. Then Taylor Jenkins Reid doubles down with the next book on my list, which was Daisy Jones and the Six. She writes the story in this like behind the music kind of style that makes it seem so realistic. Like you can visualize it so well. You feel like you're on tour with Fleetwood Mac in the 70s. I got the Runaways vibes. I don't know if you've seen the movie of The Runaways with Joan Jett and Cherry Curry, but I can't explain why I got that kind of energy from it either, so maybe you can tell me. The story is about the band The Six and a solo artist, essentially, named Daisy Jones, who come together and they create some pretty epic music. They're like top in the world, big artists, biggest band, super popular, and then they just have this really abrupt breakup in the late 70s and nobody knows why. So this is kind of like a written retelling of their whole journey through stardom, and it's really good. I hear a TV series is coming out and the cast looks amazing. I think you're gonna like it. The next book on my list is Verity by Colleen Hoover. So if you take the I'm hiring you for this special project aspect out of Evelyn Hugo and then you drop it into like a psychological thriller, that's kind of where Verity lives. In this book, our main character, Loan Ashley, is a financially struggling writer. Loan gets hired to finish off a series by a best-selling author named Verity Crawford. And so she accepts the offer because, again, why not? And so Loan shows up at the Crawford Manor and she accepts the offer by Verity's husband to stay in their home and in Verity's office until she gets all the information and content that she needs from her office so that she can like finish putting all these books together and uncover whatever she wants. And she does uncover some things. There are secrets, there's darkness. It's just really, really captivating. There are like some trigger warnings per se. I will put those down here so that you can know. But all in all, it's a really good story. It's so good. I started reading this over my lunch break at work, and then I took the rest of the day off to finish it. So do with that what you will. It was hard to put down. It was impossible to put down. I had to take the day off so I could finish a book. That is so telling. I'm not sure if this is Colleen Hoover's writing style. I've not written any of her other obviously. I've not written any of her books. I've not read any of her other books, but I know that she's a very, very popular author, and I hear that they're all great. I've not heard anyone say anything particularly negative about them, but this one I just happened to pick up because she thanked Taryn Fisher in the acknowledgments, and I really like Taryn Fisher, so here we are. Next book on the list is The Last Mrs. Parrish. Think single white female a little bit. The story follows Amber Patterson on her quest to be more than the nobody that she feels like. So she plots to infiltrate the life of this unassuming, well-off older woman. While the book is really good and interesting, okay, so there's a quote. Judge me if you must, but it's from The Fault in Our Stars. And it talks about how you fall in love, and it says that it happens slowly and then all at once. And I think that's a beautiful way of saying it. I don't know that I'd put it along with falling in love, but I will say that's how I would describe the pacing of a book like this one. Slowly and then all at once. Think of an ending like Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. Like, it just happens. There's a lot of slow buildup, it gets a little intense, and then it just like drops you off the edge of a cliff, and it like sucks because you just kind of want it to be drawn out a little bit further. I read that it's supposed to be an Amazon series. I think the article is from like 2019 though, so I'm not sure if that's still happening. It's good, it's worth reading if you would like to read it, but I just don't know that I would say it was like the best pacing at the end. It does pay off though, it does pay off really well, but I mean, it's just abrupt, so don't get your hopes up for like a drawn out, perfectly paced ending. And last but not least, we have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This is a very popular book that I did not dislike, but I also didn't love. Did I hate to say that? Okay, so first the book is about Addie LaRue. She's this free-spirited, curious girl that was born in the late 1600s, maybe early 1700s. She loves learning. She's an artist. She can draw really, really well. She loves to learn about the old gods from an older woman in her town who tells her all about them and like what they stood for and what they believed in. In an attempt to avoid a life that she didn't want, which is getting married off and having children, she accidentally prays to a god that answers after dark, which is like a huge no-go. But she does it anyway because she was desperate. She ends up living several lifetimes under a very specific curse. So the book is a little bit poetry, a little bit novel. It's a little bit of a lot of things actually. And here's the thing, I'm not, like I said, I'm not a very critical reader, but I had so much trouble getting into this book, and I think it was because it kept switching styles a little bit from like this very poetic writing to like abrupt storytelling. And I was just like, what is happening? I can't keep up. I felt like at some parts it just felt like it was lacking substance and I didn't understand the importance. Some of the chapters did bore me a little bit. Oh, I hate to say it. All in all, I loved Addie. I loved Addie LaRue for her wild heart, but I just didn't love the story. And this is also true of Gallant, which is the other book that I just recently read that'll probably be in a next recap video. I find myself very interested in like just on the cusp of being completely blown away, and then I'm just not, and I don't know what it is. I don't feel let down though because I walk away from her books so far, Addie LaRue and Gallant, loving the main characters, loving who they are as people, and just really happy that I knew them. But I also don't find myself super eager to recommend the books to my friends who also enjoy reading. This is not fast-paced. It starts off very, very slow. There's all these questions and they linger and then they're answered and then you're just like, yeah, okay, like, all right, I get it. And like, it's not a super rewarding payoff. I don't know. I wouldn't say don't read the book because I do like Addie. If nothing else, I love the concept of Addie. If you imagine hard enough, she could be out there existing and influencing art today, like someone like Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, or Peter Pan, like those characters that just like, they can stay because they're so whimsical and kind of exciting to think about. So maybe I just, like I said, maybe I just love the concept of Addie. And it might be a situation where just the parts of Addie's life that were highlighted in the story weren't the most interesting, so it was hard to stay wrapped up in it. I don't know. I could have a lot of conversation about this book, and I might just kind of do a full analysis of what I thought about it. I would still recommend reading it because I think Addie's fascinating, and I feel better having known her. It's kind of a slow wander through a field of daisies, more than it's like a, I'm reading this and I'm like, it's intense, I'm having a good time. And it might just be because I really love psychological thrillers and like the pacing in those books that I've gotten used to. I don't know. Ultimately, yes, I think you should read it, but just go into it knowing that it does take a little bit to pick up and take off.